Tom mentioned this thing called Azigo 3.0. It's like this holy grail version that we've been working on forever. We're actually kind of hoping to have it done today, but, you know, we didn't. It's software. So instead, I'm just going to wax on with, you know, the last thing anyone wants to see, PowerPoint, right? So why an active client? So I will always put this picture in until this problem goes away. This isn't a structural problem. On the internet, nobody knows your dog. That's because the people who designed it originally all knew each other. So there's no identity layer, there's no authentication. You've heard this pitch before. The basic problem is browsers are called user agents. You heard John talk about that earlier. They don't know who you are. They don't even care. And so, you know, you've got these sites, which you could think of them as very short silos or databases, kind of the same thing. And what does the poor you, that's the very pretty me, so what she does is she jumps over the operating system and the structure, and because she doesn't exist in digital form, there's nothing she can authenticate to. So she authenticates to each site, right? Hence the username password problem, right? The internet has no structural support for username and password or security or identity or anything. And of course, every site would be a different password if you're good about your passwords. Although most people just use the same password everywhere. That's an even more fantastic idea. And lastly, you know, you've heard about this idea that of no way to move data around. Well, again, you know, if there was any intention, a layer for identity, then we would have addressed that. So today, you just can't move data. I like to say we exist in digital form. You know, if I type, you jump over, right? And what we want to do is exist in digital form, where with computer, some agent, something that I call an active client, could actually speak on your behalf because, you know, you trust it. Here's Facebook's answer, which isn't bad. We solve a bunch of problems. Do you exist digitally now? Yes, you do. You exist as a profile in Facebook. Do you have something to authenticate to? Yes, you do. It's called Facebook. Log in. And with Facebook Connect, you're done, right? I mean, if everyone would just sit down and use Facebook Connect for all things, there would only be one password on the internet. Cool. And all the other passwords are gone. And you've got the beginnings with Facebook Connect. It's not just authentication, but the auth and the attributes. You've got the beginnings of moving data along, as long as the schema is Facebook's, and so on and so on. So, well, I was trying to put a rosy shine on this. It's actually the exact opposite of everything I believe in. What if your data on your device? What if your social graph, your payment, everything about you lived on a machine that you controlled? Your computer. Imagine that. Like we have RAM and processing and it would work on your behalf. Very strange idea. So here's what it would look like. You'd have this thing called an active client. Now you digitally exist. You would exist as personas, multiple. Identity is not singular. Sorry, your Facebook profile won't solve all problems. One single identity won't, I mean. Multiple identities called personas that would exist in this trusted piece of code called an active client. Much as Google and others might like to say there are no other apps that are important except the browser, they personal, you know, Google has 41 of them, native apps, you know, that are not in the browser that they ship themselves. So we're not quite there. So there may be a need to have an active client that's not just built into the browser, but actually thinks of the browser as just another app. Anyway, you'd have something to authenticate to this active client, and this is where biometrics and all kinds of stuff works really well. Like the next gen iPhone, right, will have this forward-looking camera, and you'll be able to just look at it, and you're done. So we don't even have to have one master password. You can just look at the thing, which could be facial or retinal or other kinds of biometrics. But anyway, the idea would be, if you could authenticate to an active client, a sort of digital you that you trusted, then it can authenticate on your behalf. It can make assertions on your behalf. And so what would happen is, you'd have a bidirectional data flow. You wouldn't have to fill in forms anywhere, would you? I mean, how many times do you get asked, what's your first name? The answer, it's ridiculous. If you told your active client what your name is, you'd tell it once. And it could tell people, your first name is this. Or maybe it would lie and say your first name is not that because you don't want them to know who you really are. Whatever. It works on your behalf. And again, all the other passwords would be eliminated. Forms would be filled. And a personal favorite, you get a copy of everything you digitally assert about yourself. I have been of the belief that everything I type, with a few exceptions, works for hire and so on, is something that I ought to have some rights in. Like, I typed it. I typed my first name as Paul. Why can't I have a copy of that? Why is it only every other place has a copy? If you, like Steve's, you exist in about 700 databases. The only one you have no control over and access to is you're the only one who doesn't have a copy of you, digitally. So all this strikes me as something that is architectural in nature, and a bunch of us have been, this isn't just me or Azigo, I mean, a bunch of us have been trying in various ways to bring this vision to fruition. The only thing is, these days we have more than one device. It used to be like we had a computer. Now we don't. So you need another component. You need a personal data store. And personally, I think the data should be blinded in that store. Increasingly not alone in that view. So one of the beautiful things about an active client is it can have a passphrase in it that only you know. Right? Not a shared secret ridiculous password thing. I mean a passphrase that you don't tell anyone. You put that into your phone, you put it into your computer once, it encrypts your data using that. When it's stored in the cloud, it can be synchronized to all your devices. You have backup, synchronization, all happening very fast. And you don't have to trust that the organization running it will never do evil, because they don't have your data. And everyone says, well, what about law enforcement, the Patriot Act, and all that? You can get a subpoena. If Azigo or some other entity had your data in the store, hand it over to the law enforcement, and it's a bunch of random bits. And if they can get another subpoena and kick your front door in and get your phone, they can put it together. So it takes two, and hopefully only law enforcement should have the ability to do those two things. That's the theory. So what's new? So what's new here is I believe that spying on people is totally legitimate as long as you're the one spying and you're the one you're spying on. So think of Azigo 3.0 as, this super cookie. It tracks everything you do. It's just that no one gets to see it unless you want them to. So with that being the case, as long as we have, let me go back a few slides. Here I said data capture on the right-hand arrow pointing down. As long as we can build and solve the schema mapping challenges of building these maps, which is non-trivial, we can end up with a very, very rich database of information about you. And because, when John was talking this morning, he was saying defaults. Nobody does anything, and that is so what I believe. The whole vision here is that the user doesn't do anything. They don't have to do anything different than what they're doing today. It's just that when they type, my first name is Paul, it captures that. And it goes, at least in this context, Paul thinks his first name is Paul. I'll remember that for him. What this means is that a Kynetx app, a rule, now can do queries against this data. And as long as you permission it, that should be okay. So this is the most exciting method of my life, is get attributes. So I want any Kynetx developer to be able to make a call and get an attribute like your zip code or your favorite color or whatever you want. And I won't go into the details, but rough idea is, the app has to say who it is, like some rule ID. And then really funny language of relying parties. Sometimes the app is acting as a proxy on behalf of something else. For instance, form fillers, actually they're an app, but they're acting almost as a proxy for where the data really goes, which might be logging in you saw to Facebook. So in this case, Facebook would be the relying party. And we need that information in order to remember context, because we need to know people are very different in different contexts.